Japan has reached a historic milestone. For the first time in its post war history, the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, or the LDP, has chosen a woman, Sanae Takaichi, as its leader. Now, the vote among party lawmakers and members has positioned her as the country's next prime minister, pending confirmation in a special diet vote on 15th of October. Now, her rise is striking. Japan has seen four prime ministers in 5 years, a revolving door cycle of short lived leadership. Against this backdrop of fatigue, economic stagnation, and public distrust, Takaichi's victory represents both the promise of change and the risks of continuity. Some observers already call her Japan's Margaret Thatcher. So, who is Sanae Takaichi? And why is her election resonating so widely across the globe? The key takeaways from this historic moment in Japan can be understood in eight following points. The first is, let's understand the contest. The LTP election came at a critical juncture. The resignation of Shigeru Ishiba in July this year, after two defeats that cost the party its majority in both houses, forced the LTP to search for a leader capable of restoring confidence and reviving a stagnating economy. Five candidates entered the race, but three were clear frontrunners. Shinjiro Koizumi, the youngest contender, known for his charisma and pragmatism, he promoted balanced diplomacy with Washington and was seen as a bridge to younger voters. The second was Yoshimasa Hayashi, who's the chief cabinet secretary representing the party establishment. And third was Sanae Takaichi, a veteran politician, nationalist, and conservative who presented herself as a fresh and decisive change. Most expected Koizumi to win, and yet Takaichi pulled off an upset, prevailing in the second round and energizing conservative factions with her hawkish security stance and promise to revive Abenomics. Her victory reflects not only her experience but also the LDP's bet that a firm ideological figure could consolidate its fractured base after years of drift. Second, let's understand the political background. So, Takaichi is a veteran with deep roots. She's far from new to politics. First elected to the Diet in 1993, she has served in multiple cabinet posts, covering internal affairs, economics, and communications, etc. Known for her decisiveness and willingness to take controversial positions, she contrasts with Japan's consensus driven political culture. She's closely linked to Nippon Kaigi, Japan's largest nationalist lobby, which advocates traditional family values, constitutional revision, and stronger defense capabilities. Takaichi herself champions constitutional revisionism that I just mentioned about, aiming to give Japan a greater military role and end its post war constraints. Her career trajectory owes much to the late Shinzo Abe. Japan's longest serving prime minister he was. Abe mentored her, and she has consistently described herself as his protege. In her, the continuity of Abe's economic and security vision combines with a distinctly nationalist edge. The third point, then, to understand is her economic orientation, which is often regarded as Abenomics 2.0. The economy will be the crucible of her leadership. Japan, the world's fifth largest economy with GDP above $4 trillion, remains trapped in slow growth. Inflation erodes household wages, productivity lags, and public frustration with living costs is mounting. Scandals involving political kickbacks and slush funds have deepened mistrust with the LTP lawmakers. So Takaichi promises to double down on Abenomics, which rests on three economic pillars. First is on fiscal stimulus, which means more public spending despite a towering 260% of debt to GDP ratio, the highest among developed economies. The second is monetary easing, which means ultra low interest rates, even as bond markets worry about their sustainability. And third is structural reforms. Now, this was the unfulfilled sector under Abe, but Takaichi pledges renewed deregulation while protecting sensitive sectors. Now, here we have to remember that when introduced in 2012 2013, Abenomics lifted markets but failed to deliver long term economic revival or growth, leaving behind a high debt. Takaichi nonetheless argues that stimulus remains essential and insists that Japan must grow out of debt and not adopt austerity. Now, markets are quite split on this stand. Equities, particularly the Nikkei, surged 4% on her win, while bond yields hit their highest since 1999. Rating agencies are watching closely, and they are uneasy about whether renewed spending could trigger more fiscal instability. Now, her task will be to spur growth without tipping into a debt or currency crisis. Now, let's come to the fourth part, which is about the domestic agenda. Japan's demographic decline is severe. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, the population fell by almost 900,000 people in 2024, leaving just 120 million people in Japan. Since peaking at 126.6 million in 2009, Japan has seen 16 straight years of demographic decline, driven by economic problems and entrenched gender norms. Now, immigration has been one response. Foreigners now account for almost 3% of the population, a small share globally, but double Japan's numbers a decade ago. Now, in a homogeneous and insular society such as Japan, this rise has sparked unease among traditional Japanese. And Takaichi has leaned into that skepticism, casting immigration as a cultural risk rather than an economic need. Now, this stance appeals to conservatives but risks deepening labor shortages as the workforce ages. Her social policies are similarly conservative. She opposes separate surnames for married couples. She rejects female succession to the imperial throne of Japan and has voiced opposition to homosexual rights and marriages. Thus, while she may become Japan's first woman prime minister, she is not really a feminist icon. For many Japanese women, her rise is paradoxical, breaking the glass ceiling while resisting reforms on gender equality. Now, let's understand the fifth aspect, which is to do with foreign policy. And in my opinion, this is going to be hawkish and uncompromising. Takaichi is one of Japan's most hawkish politicians. She has pressed for stronger defense, taken a confrontational line towards China, and visited the controversial Yasukuni Shrine, which angers China and South Korea by honoring war dead, including convicted war criminals. Her election will be closely monitored and watched in both Washington and Beijing. While Koizumi favored a balanced approach, Takaichi signals a harder edge. She has already floated renegotiating the trade deal with the United States, echoing the Abe Trump dynamic, but potentially more assertively. Her foreign policy priorities will include number one, managing US ties amid a volatile Trumpian environment, and two, navigating tensions with China in a region unsettled by the Ukraine war while maintaining economic interdependence. At home, her hawkishness appeals to factions that argue Japan has been too cautious on security. Abroad, it risks aggravating already fragile regional balances. And here, let me just make you understand a bit on the party politics and the factions and coalitions within LTP, and which is the sixth point. Now, the LTP, though dominant, is fragmented. It encompasses nationalist hardliners, pro business moderates, and pro China voices. These collectively make different factions within LTP. Takaichi's success came from rallying conservatives, but governing will require a coalition management. Without a secure majority, she must negotiate with opposition parties, particularly on fiscal policy and tax cuts. Now, some speculate she may dissolve the lower house to seek a stronger mandate, though the risks are high given the LDP's weak public approval. So, in more likelihood, she will try to draw opposition into her fold with concessions such as targeted tax cuts, etc. Her ability to manage party factions and build pragmatic coalitions will determine whether she stabilizes her premiership or she becomes another casualty of Japan's revolving door leadership. And that brings us to the point on her symbolism and contradiction as Japan's first female prime minister. Takaichi's rise is undeniably symbolic. Japan, long criticized for lagging on gender equality, is on the verge of its first female prime minister. Yet the symbolism clashes with her politics. Unlike other global female icons and leaders, Takaichi has not advanced on women's rights. She actively opposes reforms that many see as basic equality. She represents what some call regressive representation, a woman leader who reinforces patriarchal norms rather than dismantling them. So, for many Japanese women, her election feels like the progress only in optics and not in substance. And that brings me to the last point on what should we expect from her win in New Delhi. For India, Takaichi's rise is encouraging. As a protege of Shinzo Abe, widely admired in New Delhi, she inherits his strong commitment to India Japan ties. Her hawkish stance on China dovetails with India's strategic interest in the Indo Pacific and the burgeoning defense cooperation between India and Japan. The expectation is that under her leadership, defense cooperation, trade integration, resilience of supply chains, and more strategic alignment would follow. With India and Japan already coordinating on infrastructure and other issues, Takaichi's approach is likely to add momentum to this partnership. And I'll be back to discuss the direction of India Japan bilateral ties as Sanae Takaichi is most likely confirmed as the Japanese Prime Minister after mid October. Stay tuned.